This is every major feature iPhone stole from Android. Let's go. Alright, first of all, pull down on your iPhone screen right now. That shade, notifications, alerts, little bits of information stacked neatly feels pretty normal, right? Well, here's the funny part. When Android users were doing this in 2008, iPhone users were still tapping pop-up boxes one by one. Yeah, Android launched with a persistent notification shade from day one. Apple didn't add anything close to it until iOS 5 in 2011. That's a 3-year gap. And once Apple finally added it, nobody questioned it. It just became the iPhone way. But a pattern formed. Android does it first, Apple reframes it later, behaves holier than thou. In fact, the next thing is kinda crazy to think about, because early iPhones couldn't truly run apps in the background. If you left an app, it basically froze. In Android land, well, from a very first Android phone in 2008, apps could keep running. Music, GPS, syncing, all of it. Apple eventually gave in with iOS 4 in 2010, introducing multitasking, but with tight restrictions and very careful wording. Even today, iOS kills background apps aggressively. And Apple believes that's the best way. Maybe it is, considering how the biggest battery an iPhone has ever had is 5,000 milliamp hours, while Androids are now bringing 10,000 milliamp hour batteries. Now, here's where things start getting downright funny, because one of the most iconic Android features people have used for years is widgets. Actual interactive widgets on the home screen. Weather, calendar, music, controls. Android users had them in 2008. iPhone users, they waited until 2020. Unbelievable. An entire generation of smartphones went by before Apple added home screen widgets in iOS 14. And when they did, it was framed as a brand new design philosophy, even though they have had widgets on the home screen sidebar for a longer time, yet you couldn't add them to your home screen. Same feature, new story. And while we're talking about interacting with widgets, there's another that Android users interacted with for years until iPhones finally had them in iOS 7. What is it? Quick toggles. Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, airplane mode, flashlight. On Android, you could swipe down and flip switches years before Apple allowed anything like that. Apple took around 5 years and 7 iOS versions to add quick toggles in the form of Control Center. But wait. Typing is about to expose this pattern even harder, because for the longest time, iPhone users were locked into one keyboard. One. Android users? They were installing third-party keyboards like Swipe and SwiftKey back in 2010. Apple didn't allow third-party keyboards until iOS 8 in 2014, and when Apple added it, once again, the conversation shifted from why doesn't iPhone have this to look how polished Apple's version is. Again, different framing, same idea. Now, let's talk about organization, because this one took Apple a very long time to accept. Do you know that on Android you always had an app drawer? Apps lived in one place. Your home screen stayed clean. iPhones? Every app dumped straight onto the home screen. There was no app drawer until iOS 14, when Apple added the app library, an app drawer that automatically categorized your apps into different folders. And now, when Android OEMs have been copying this category system into their app drawers, iPhone users call it a copycat, when it literally took them a 12-year delay to introduce an app drawer in the first place. At this point, some iPhone users might be thinking, at least Apple invented the gesture navigation system with iPhone X. Well, I hate to break this to you, but Palm Pre tried this idea in 2009. But for the nerds out there who'll argue that Palm is WebOS, not Android, well, the Nokia N9 had gesture navigation in 2011. So yeah, even those cool gesture navigations are not purely an Apple idea from the get-go. Now here's where things get even spicier, because this next one is very recent. If you've ever used a Google Pixel, comment down below if you know this feature. Unknown number calls, Google Assistant answers for you, live transcription, you decide whether to pick up. Android users had this in 2018. Apple added live voicemail with real-time transcription in iOS 17, 5 years later. And right after that came Hold Assist, letting your phone wait on hold for you. Android users? Pixel phones had Hold for Me years earlier. Apple added it in iOS 17. And if you're thinking we're kinda roasting Apple now, well, you ain't seen nothing now, cause next, let's talk about Apple's biggest strength, customization. For years, Android users could change icon shapes, tint icons, place apps freely, use custom launchers. All the while, iPhone users couldn't even move the icons as per their choice on the home screen. Yeah, people just kind of ignored that. But anyways, iOS 18 arrived. Suddenly, icons can be tinted. Apps can be placed freely. The home screen is customizable enough to call it a start in a good direction. But again, if you compare it to Androids, it's like comparing a rat to Godzilla. Now, I almost didn't include this, but the comments on the flagship video of my channel suggested otherwise. And yeah, makes sense, because the dynamic island, which Apple presented as a revolutionary way to blend the camera cutout hardware, which Android has had for years, and again, going deep into which will open another Pandora's box that I don't want to, because this video is just about the software side. Comment down below if you want to see a hardware version of this video. But yeah, basically persistent UI elements that expand, show live activities, navigation, music, calls. Android had variations of this concept for years through system overlays, bubbles, and notification-based live activities, let alone third-party apps made by developers. So I think it's pretty safe to assume that Apple didn't invent the idea, they just formalized it. And that's the pattern that has gone on for years. Android experiments, Apple standardizes, and plays holier than thou, like I mentioned earlier. Now, before we wrap this up, here's one last category Apple is actively catching up in. Still barely made it. It has to be AI. Yeah, probably one of the biggest weaknesses of Apple in a really long time. So let's just say that various AI features have been present in so many Android phones for a really long time, from live translation of calls to object erasers and other AI photo tricks, which Apple is still catching up in. And don't even get me started on the Siri fiasco. And again, this isn't about saying Android is better or Apple is bad. It's about breaking the myth that iPhone features appear out of nowhere, because when you line up the timelines, the story flips. In fact, I also made a flipped version of this video a few months ago. That is, Apple's most original iOS features Android copied. Must be visible on the end screen, so if you're interested, go watch it. And yeah, don't forget to like, dislike, or comment. And, of course, would be a massive support to the channel if you subscribe. Thanks!